You're listening to Gone Mobile, your input and output for all things .NET MAUI and mobile.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Gone Mobile. Actually, this one's probably 2 episodes after. We missed a week in there for Canada Day, eh?
Yay. Did we, or did you just not upload the audio and it just didn't get released?
Well, I was a boot too, but, yeah.
Don't feed the beast, right?
No,
I hear that one all the time. They're like, you say about. All of the Americans. I'm like,
yeah.
Dude, I'm saying about. I don't know what you're hearing.
What you're
David
hearing
does the
is
same
wrong.
thing. Yeah, David, all the time. Every time I talk to him, he's like, hey, it's a boot. And I'm like, well, first of all, I don't say a. Have you ever said a?
Oh, I think I do sometimes.
Oh, John, what are you doing?
I not on purpose. I mean, it's and just living that one out. But the thing is, and you're not that. I mean, you're farther north than me by a bit, but not like a crazy amount. I mean, you're more east than north, or maybe northeast, perfectly almost.
Just like a pinch, yeah.
Yeah. So, but if you think about like how much of the U.S., like you're saying, yeah, David might say a boot more than we do. How much of the kind of Midwest is about this? About, see, I said about. How much of the Midwest is actually, at the same like northern point as us? And I think that's more how the sounds come out than U.S. versus Canada.
I do know if you head to like Newfoundland or something, they have like their own verbiage.
That's totally different than the stereotype jokes, right?
Oh,
like
yeah,
that's wild to understand.
It's a different language. Okay.
Yeah.
So if you're judging Canadian based on how John and I speak, Quebec, obviously they're French, so their English sounds different.
Mm-hmm.
And when they speak English, and Newfoundland is, I don't know. Some of the people that I've talked to there, I'm like, dude, I don't know what you're saying to me right now.
Yeah. And then like Manitoba, sounds like that, right?
Yep. Manitoba.
Yeah.
But you know what it is? Because on Hockey Night in Canada, so I think sometimes they get our hockey feed.
Yeah. And
there's a guy on there that talks, and he is very stereotypical Canadian. I don't know if you know who I'm talking about. I forget his name.
I think,
but
yeah.
He comes on, he's an old hockey player, and it's like, oh my God, dude, you're stereotyping us like right now. You're
giving everyone all of the fodder that they need, right?
Exactly. So we don't hear it. Besides, if I go into programming terms, let me make fun of some of the American stereotypes I hear. You've picked them up, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, so the thing about where I am is I play both cards, both sides of the fence kind of thing, because I'm surrounded by the US. And so, when it's to my advantage, when I'm around my American friends, I'm like, hey, I'm basically American. Like I'm one of you, because I just live right by America. And then of course, when I, in the rest of the world, I'm like, well, I'm not American, I'm Canadian, thanks.
Yeah.
So I kind of, use that one to my advantage. And because of that, yeah, I probably pick up on some of the stuff, because I am like growing up, TV stations and everything, right? We're all from Detroit.
Oh, so. Yeah. Well, we don't watch CBC, the Canadian broadcasting.
Well, no. I mean,
it's awful.
And you probably had stuff coming in from Buffalo all the time too, right? So kind of the same idea.
Yep.
Yeah.
There was one joke I did want to make, and I hear this all the time from my American colleagues or anybody I work with, and they say enums. I'm like, dude,
yeah.
Enum, number. Do you say number or do you say number? Enum, not enums.
I think I that's a funny one, because I know I used to say enum, and then I think I was just around enough people that are like enum, and then it just became
you've popped it a few times, and I've been like, what are you saying to me right now, John?
Hey, I still try to often spell color with a U, so I got that.
Okay, good. Don't lose the heritage.
Yeah.
All right. So we've talked about a lot about Canada and people saying enums, enums.
Mm-hmm.
What are we talking about today?
Well, I was a little concerned when I saw the title. I wasn't sure if we'd have to put the explicit, flag on the episode. Like,
okay, marketing,
something about backends.
Marketing is not my strong point. and I could do far worse. Let's be honest.
Oh, yeah.
Jon is frequently
No,
R-rating
you
me. He's
could.
like, dude, you can't say that.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay. So it is called the backends. We're talking about the backends. Okay.
Take off.
So today we're talking about the backend, the stuff that drives our apps.
Yeah. Okay. Well, what drives your app?
Well, I mean, obviously as .NET people, we're writing ASP.NET Core, right? At least I am. You are too. I know you are.
Yeah. I mean, that's probably been like the most .NET thing with longevity, that of all .NET things is just like writing the web parts of things in .NET. But for a while it was kind of, ASP.NET
janky.
Kind of meant more on the client side, like Angular and all that fun stuff too, right? But
web forms and MVC and we've come a long way. MVC
but we're not talking about
back with a bang, right? Because it's Blazor now.
No, absolutely. But
we're not talking about that.
We're not talking about client. We're talking about the backends. And so yes, .NET all the way, API controllers. I'm still honestly like my app is done in .NET on the backend too, and I there's been so many changes to like how API controllers and all that stuff work. I feel like, and maybe not. There's been a lot of change, but maybe like not really has that much has actually changed under the hood. I still seem to somehow figure out how to make stuff work, but I feel like all of the I never know if I'm doing it right. Basically, like, is my controller have the right return type? Can I do this or that with it? So that one's always confused me.
Well, they still have controllers, right? But now they like minimal APIs, right? I think it's just because it's easy to get going. Like you don't need
there's minimal
plumbing.
APIs. Yeah, you don't need as much of that. But there's also like I don't have it open, but I don't know. Like, is IActionResult still the thing to do? Is it okay?
Yeah, because there's other ways you can control kind of the return type. Like you can mark it with attributes.
Okay, and they've done more, I guess, to try and make like some of that stuff work implicitly, I suppose. Yep. Is that the case? Like I can return just an object, it seems like, and then they'll do the right thing.
Yep. Okay. And they do that more for like the Swagger or the OpenAPI. OpenAPI actually is what we should say now, because Swagger is, well, I mean, Microsoft's been using it for years and it's going away now. So it's OpenAPI.
Yeah. Right.
OpenAPI is the cool thing.
Nice.
And so they do all those attributes and stuff, and the IActionResult is kind of just a roundabout way of getting to something that defines a type.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't really matter. One way or the other, you're going to get a type. Return a task with a type, put an attribute on it, and return that type as an action result.
And I actually was looking at recently, and I'm this is just more kind of, I guess, syntactic sugar or stuff around all of that part of it. I started looking at, what was I looking at this for? Oh, I was looking at doing some like OpenAI stuff, got to get all the chat GPTs and all of the things. And so making my like web API be the thing that talks to chat GPT for all the hopefully obvious reasons of security and stuff.
Yep.
And then having that send stuff back to my client. Right. And so I started looking at like streaming results back, because I wanted to like get that kind of chat stream coming back, because I want my app to be able to say like, hey, here's the current state of my pool's chemical levels. Like, what do you want me to do here? And then it's going to be like, oh, blah, 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 do this, do this, do this.
You wanted it to look like that it's being typed? Is that what you're saying? Or just return the result as it's coming in?
Yeah, more the return results as they're coming in, just in case it's like I don't know. I feel like that would be a nicer experience than like seeing this big like just spinning thing and then all of a sudden like all the stuff on your screen at once.
You know that it returns the result as one solid object, but then you can like even ChatGPT does that. They put that delay in, so it looks like you're talking to somebody.
Yeah, that's fine. But
if you just hit enter or something and it goes, oh, here you go.
Yeah,
I'll shut up now.
Their API has like a streaming aspect to it if you want to do it that way. So
all right.
So I assume you can do that.
Enumerable.
I think that's what I was using, and as best as I could tell, I think in like .NET 5 or maybe 6, they added support for like streaming the JSON back in whatever the way clients expect JSON to be streamed, so that you don't have to have the whole JSON document at once, basically, right? Yeah.
No, it's a smart way of doing it.
Yeah.
By the way, I found a hypocrisy in my enums.
Mm.
Do you call them enumerators?
Yeah, they're not enumerators.
Damn. Yeah. Oh, front foot.
Oh, oh,
Okay.
yeah.
Well, all right. We're burned. That's all right.
Yeah.
I can live with that.
I
It's
guess,
still an
I guess
enum.
that's it. We may as well just end the podcast right
Yeah.
now.
No
Stop producing
enumerators.
episodes.
Enumerators. Okay.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Ah.
So you got OpenAPI. You're using
Mhm.
OpenAPI to generate or to define your contracts. Are you generating your objects yet? Are you cool? Or are you just
generating like what? No, I mean, so I I think you've told me I shouldn't do this before, but my
Uh-oh.
object model is shared between, like, my .NET code to implement my objects is shared between my client and my server. So,
Well, it's your app. So I
Yeah.
always say, like, do what works for you. If it's one app and you're the owner, you can get away with it. But in a big project, yeah, I'd probably have to give you a backhand because somebody will abuse that, right? Or you needed to go to a local data store, or
yeah,
I don't know. It's not supposed to hop tiers. And if it
well,
does, then you'll just kind of have to deal with that later if it becomes a problem. Which you've been looking at offline, so it's kind of starting to show its face at you, is
but
it not?
no, it's been fine. I mean, like, my models are pretty simple, and so, like, if I guess, give me an example of
When that'll hit you?
yeah.
If you have to sync data to and from, and the data can be updated.
Yeah, but it's just data objects that, like,
Oh,
it's just a class, right? It's just a container.
yeah, yeah, but there's what if you want to mark some stuff on it for SQLite? Or what if you
Yeah.
want to mark some stuff on it for whatever that light DB you were using? I don't know
Okay,
if does
maybe
that use
there might
attributes?
be one. Is there one case now? No. No, that's a different part. I'm trying to think if I could actually prove you right by something that I was adding recently, but that's not the
No,
case.
you don't need to prove me right. Whatever works. Again, you're the lone app developer.
Yeah.
It works for you.
I mean,
In
I
big
would probably
teams, it
do.
can become an issue.
Yeah, no, that's fair, and I would probably do the evil thing of, like, if I need something that SQLite only cares about, I'd just add the property, and then the server would just ignore it, and I would know that I ignore it. But of course, if somebody's working on the server, they don't know that that's there for one side and not the other. And yeah, I can see what you're saying.
You know where this really did become an issue is because we used to make a contracts library, like a C# library that contained all the POCOs, plain old C# objects, if you want the full terminology.
Mm-hmm.
So we'd make that, and that would be shared between server and client. The problem is the client would be like, I want to put this in a SQLite database. So SQLite, we love that library. Frank Kruger made it. It's great, but he's big on attributes. He doesn't like the external mapping. Okay, that's fine. So what people would do is put SQLite on the thing, mark the attributes, and you'd have like this kind of now dirty, not POCO library.
Which is why I didn't actually use that library myself here either, because I didn't want to have one, so there is an instance where I could have done it if I wasn't sharing. It would have been more natural to do it.
Well, now the fun thing is about OpenAPI, and we've had this for several years, but now we basically end up, I don't want to say duplicating, but generating our object classes out of the OpenAPI spec or Swagger before. And so you generate all the contracts. So essentially your contracts were built for the thing you're using them in, and they were, and they still existed in the API, but they were two separate beings.
Right.
And I mean, that now it's great because now technically these are I generated them, I can destroy them. But if you generate them again, then it might wipe out your stuff. So then you get into partials and all that mess. So it just, pick your poison, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. Fair.
Now, are you generating your objects now? Like a cool guy?
No.
No,
I mean,
you're typing them all out by hand?
I have them. I don't really change them a lot these days. Like,
All right.
so.
Do you share the contracts? Are you doing the old school way that I just mentioned?
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like, those objects are, they're attributed with like some JSON attributes, but that's kind of it. And then those just come down from my server, and They're what I use in the app, and I shove those into SQLite, and everything's good.
So that can become an issue for teams for sure.
Yeah.
And the reason is you might have a back-end team writing all this junk. I won't say junk. All these things, all these contracts that come back, and you need to be able to keep up. And I don't want to keep updating a NuGet package like every 5 minutes because they're like, hey, we just add another type. So now the cool kid way to do it is they keep changing this. Microsoft, they keep moving the posts on us.
Well,
you gotta tell them to stop, John. Keep in there for us.
Gotta keep people upgrading, right?
So they released this thing for OpenAI called Kyoto. I don't even know if I'm saying that right.
OpenAPI, right? Not OpenAI.
When
you said OpenAI. I just wanted to clarify for people in case they're like, oh, it's ChatGPT related?
No, I didn't put the P in.
Yeah.
It's hard. Come on, man. This is like it's like one syllable, one letter.
Yeah, no,
off.
I hear you. I probably have done it too.
I'm getting old. Can't remember all these acronyms anymore.
See now. Yeah, I hear you.
Yeah, okay. Thanks. So this Kyoto thing came out. This is the new popular, well, I don't want to say popular but it's the new way that Microsoft's kind of putting it out there.
Mm-hmm.
And you bring all these flipping libraries in, and it's like these arguments go through a dictionary. Oh, dude, I'm not feeling it.
So, that generates it from the OpenAPI definition. But what, like, I guess, somewhere along the line, like you've got to define the thing that you're returning somewhere. Like, how does it?
It would be in the API because the API has that whole contract, so you can still go into Swagger and it'll say, I'm going to return this.
Okay, so say I have an API controller that returns a person object. Yeah. And that person object has, a name, first name, last name, phone number, whatever, a bunch of properties. Yep. I still have to create that like on the server side then, right?
Yes.
And then OpenAPI is like, oh, I'll create a new
like a definition
person class, based on the OpenAPI definition that your server generated from the person type that you're returning from that API.
Yes. And it's returning, it's generating two things. It's generating your contract to get, like, to call that API. So it's like, here's the endpoint, and then it's generating the contract, which is quite beautiful, right? So as your team is changing it, you just go, run a command line, updates it in your project, boom. You can set the namespace, the class name, all that cool stuff. It works great.
As long as you're not, well, I guess, presumably it's generating a good OpenAPI spec, because I know if the OpenAPI spec isn't good, it's not going to get, crap in, crap out.
I think Kyoto is still beta-ish.
Yeah. So what I'm getting at is a while back, I was trying to do some stuff around like Apple's App Store Connect API. They have a REST API. They publish an OpenAPI spec.
Yeah, not fair. You know why. We'll get there. Why? Because Apple doesn't do anything by a flipping standard ever.
So like
all of their APIs are like, how did we get here?
It works, like it generate, like I think I used Kyoto at one point to do it a while back.
Oh, you did try it.
Yeah.
But I remember I was trying to get you into my favorite, which we'll get to.
Yeah. It worked, and I used it, but then it's just like, Apple, like
they don't do anything. Apple never does anything by the book. They're like, hey, there's our standards, and then there's the rest of the world.
And so you're holding it wrong, so ours is correct.
And well, and APNS is still, even though it's HTTP, I'm like,
is it HTTP 3 now? I haven't followed along. I've got PTSD from dealing with that.
The good part is that doesn't really affect us too much, but the way they do their REST APIs, it's like, here's this dynamic object, and then we clip on all this metadata everywhere, and you're like, okay, why have a contract?
Exactly.
Hey, okay.
So the thing you were trying to get me to use, I tried with their thing, and it failed horribly, unfortunately.
Well, it didn't do bad. It didn't do bad, but it didn't do
work.
Great.
At least Kyoto, gave me something that worked technically.
So I'm a big fan of something called Refit, and Refit is like part of the reactive UI group, so you can follow why I used it. But I think a lot of people use it anyways.
Like it was a thing way back in the day, and I remember using it in Xamarin, early Xamarin days, to you generate the API client for me and stuff. It was great. I liked it. I liked
it
the
did all
idea
the
of it.
best practices on HTTP client.
Yeah.
It kind of generated all that fluff. And now it's been moved to source generators. It's still doing all that stuff. And it works fantastic. But another tool came out called Refitter. And Refitter I like because now it generates, not only does it generate the contracts, it generates a refit contract that I can look at, kind of muck with it if I need to, right? Because it generates partials. And it just works. And it's beautiful because I can still have all the power of refit, because there's a lot more than just source generation for refit. It does the whole darn thing. And I'm like, yes.
So that begs the question that, in, I don't know, how old is Refit? It's been a few years since it was out, and now there's Refitter.
Version 7. Yep. And
so
Refitter is like a CLI. Like it's
how many years though before we get Refitist?
Oh, that's what you were doing. You were looking for the button to make the sound.
Yeah.
Nice. Canadian humor at its best.
Yeah.
You just feeding the beast.
Had to do it. But no, that's so yeah. It's a tool. It's more like an add-on to Refit, right? Because it's like a tool to generate the Refit code to use
to
essentially
generate more code out,
right?
Build time.
It's a generator for the generator.
Yeah. But it's beautiful. Refit is beautiful for many, many reasons beyond the source generation, and I still use it. I've been using it for years. Fantastic.
So Refit's cool. Yeah, you were going to say something else about Refit?
No, I'm done with Refit. Refit's cool. So I was going to ask you next, do you do resiliency on your calls?
Yeah. So and when we're talking about this, like, we're talking about the backends, right? But this is kind of like your backend that might be calling something else, right? Some other API, because that's a pretty common thing. You might be calling it from your client too, but like, do you not run into that a lot where you're calling services between services? Okay.
Yeah, I do, but I don't do resiliency on the server.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I don't really either there. Because if it's going to fail, like I don't want the server chugging away retrying. Like that's a client side thing to have an opinion on, right?
Yep.
I'll just pass through the error to the client. The client can decide if it wants to retry or not.
And I think for a lot of the funny part is that people go, well, you don't use resiliency on your apps. Like I don't put Poly in any of the templates. I haven't put it in my new Mediator library. I have resiliency there.
Why not?
No. And the reason is because most of my apps, I always have some sort of offline version. And if I'm doing offline, like in any aspect, I'm always hitting the database. And then the database is being synchronized. I'm never hitting the API directly.
Right.
And that's just a technique I've been using for years because it's nice and zippy. And sure, I can force a retry, but I'm not going to make the user sit there and wait.
So what do you do in a case where like, okay, you're trying to save something and really the app kind of needs to block on that happening, and it's before the user can do something else? Like you just kind of say, hey, it didn't work, and then they can hit the button again.
Yeah, for saving and stuff, that's what I try to do, because then, there's so many things that can go wrong with resiliency.
Oh.
Like,
do you want a good example, firsthand example?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, so I've been using it in my app for a long time, using Poly, and so often it's like, if I'm gonna save some data, I because people are using this with their pool, it seems like often enough they're like out by their equipment where the Wi-Fi connection is real janky. Maybe, it's going back and forth to cellular. So I'm like, I had enough people that are like, this is a problem. I have to hit the button. And after a couple times it works. I'm like, okay, let's just, it's not that big of a deal to have it try, 2 times even before I throw up the error, right? Like give it the old extra effort. So I put that in a lot of places, and somewhere along the line, and I didn't realize this until kind of recently, I actually, the way that my authentication works, one of my login providers is to the server, but then like the server talks to another auth provider, and it's all like OAuth kind of based and whatever, which is not an uncommon setup. But the other server it talks to, we've had problems with it, like thinking that the API server is like, doing some DDoS attack. So like Cloudflare is like really picky, and it was like, oh, because now they're looking at the user agent that is coming from the server is not like it's not something it expects, and so it's like, nope, drop it. It looks suspicious, right? Anyway, we fixed that up, but then we were still having some problems with this. And then it turns out one of the things I think that was aggravating this was I didn't realize that my resiliency, the poly stuff was, I had abstracted it away enough in my client code that it was trying logins multiple times, even though it might, like you typed in the wrong password. And it's like, let me try doing that 3 times. Like, it's not going to work, every time, anytime. So that was a good example of a problem that you can run into where I'm like, oh,
Did you, and you had that buried deep, did you?
Yeah, that was the problem, right? It was like, it was some generic, like, do this post to a API and, give me the type, the request and response type, and wrap that in a poly, policy, and
oops,
don't use that one for the login call.
Well, it's funny because the other part that I tend to see is that if it retries and it still did get to the server, like the request, it's just the client didn't get the kickback, or
right,
the timeout happened before it got the kickback. It tends to send it twice. So now you've got like duplicate objects.
Yeah.
There's ways to fix that, right? You can mark it with a unique identifier and the whole, yeah. But that would happen where it would send it twice. And do you know how many people, like, I work with a lot of young devs, and nothing against them, but they don't really know async, like these server devs that come in, they're interns. I'm like, dude, you didn't use a cancellation token. I'm like, oh, nobody else is. I'm like, okay, well, do you know what it's for? I assumed if the user closed the browser or the connection failed, right?
Yeah.
So you got to use it, because if he disconnects, maybe the transaction's no longer any good because it doesn't kick back. And
right.
So they were just like, yeah, we ignored it. And I'm like, okay, well, now you created 2 objects because it's not. Thanks.
And if you have a that's always funny, right? Because I always think the hardest part of like properly using cancellation tokens is like starting from the top of the API design, right? Or like the most like the first like entry points, right? And then flowing that through. But if someone's giving you a cancellation token, that's gold. Like, just
use it.
I have this. I can use it. This is great. It's it's the cases where it's like, oh, really? I'd like a cancellation token, and no one's giving me one that gives me the bad feelings. But yeah.
Well, and I find that in a lot of APIs too, right? There's no cancellation token, which is again another one. The reasons I have love for RX, because you kind of get it implicitly.
Yeah, okay. Kind of forces the issue.
Yeah. Well, if the subscription dies before it gets there, throw it away. So,
yeah.
So, okay, we've talked about how we generate. We've talked about resiliency a bit. What about GraphQL OData? You ever use that?
Oh yeah. No, I don't. I've used OData. I've done GraphQL from like a client perspective. I've never tried to shove GraphQL, as a like exposing my endpoint via GraphQL.
Okay.
That has always felt like a lot of extra work that I didn't really want to do. And same with OData. Like, I know, like, I think at some point you kind of got it for free, quote unquote, if you did things a certain way. But it felt like building up on top of some, standard, and adding more work compared to the value I was getting from it. Like, I'm not usually producing these things for other people to consume, right?
Right. And that's a good point. I mean, I've played with GraphQL. I haven't done it in a production setting yet. But when we talk about like customer facing APIs, so like, let's say you've got an integration point, it can make sense.
Yeah, for sure.
But I've used OData in a production setting where a customer could do their thing. And do you know what I spent most of the time doing at that point? Can you take a guess? Any guesses?
I know.
Really easy. Preventing them from DDoSing us to death, right? Because OData doesn't necessarily, didn't. I still don't think it does, because you can let it go wild, right? So you lose control of like the standard endpoint. You can be like, dude, this is what you're getting.
Right. Like, you're going to give me these parameters because I need these to filter down some massive queries, so you don't try and return the whole database.
Right. And people would.
Yeah.
Right. And then they started releasing, okay, you can set a maximum of like 300, for example. Okay, well, that's still a lot of bandwidth to use. That's fine. But what would happen is we'd always be doing these things, then sort. You were a database guy, right?
Yeah.
when you get into order buys and you're like, oh,
yeah,
we didn't put the right includes for that order buy.
Nobody will ever try and sort by this field.
Right. And so you'd start seeing them there. So you spent more time dealing with the security, because the security was also dangerous too.
Yeah.
Clauses, there's stuff you can go wild there. You have to think. And then there was the indexing of hitting the database. And there was like, okay, don't return the database.
Mm-hmm.
Don't use all of the available bandwidth. So you spent more time dealing with that than just working with the data.
Right. So you're trying to create this like whole kind of generic way for people to get whatever they want from it 5 different ways, when really, if you just kind of said like,
this is
what are you trying to get from this? And then, okay, give me this and I'll get you exactly that answer. And it'll take, an hour
minutes
to implement.
Yeah. The hour is basically, it took me 5 minutes to code it. Then it went through DevOps. Then it went through release. And then it went through a manager. And then it hit the server. Right. So,
and it's easier, like from a consuming it perspective, it's like, if I have just this OData, I know I'm always thinking at that point about kind of the stuff that you were trying to guard against, which is like, well, if I do it like this, is that going to return like way more data than I need to? And not so much because I care about the service I'm hitting, but more like I want my stuff to be fast, right? So I'm having to think through more of like, if I want this very specific scenario, how do I do this well? How do I do it the best way versus just, if you have the API, it's like, oh yeah, here's the things that I'm able to do. I can just do it and be done.
Yeah. Well, and the funny thing is that we also start to put on these magic handcuffs of like, hey, you could only return 300 records.
Mm-hmm.
And for a mobile app, I mean, here's the thing: we've got paging, we've got all that good stuff, the skip, run through these pages. But people generally tend to send that pretty small, because back in the DOM days when we did like web forms and ASP.NET, the DOM sucked, right?
Yeah.
You rendered 200 or 300 items to a drop down. Because those weren't virtual yet. It would render all that to the DOM immediately, and it would suck.
Yeah.
Right. To consume even like 5,000 or 6,000 records, you're talking about like anywhere between 20 to 100K. That's nothing. Right?
Yeah, it's not a lot of data to push through. It's just
and if you're using a virtualized collection view, well, this doesn't change the equation at all. It saves you some server.
Yeah.
Right. Call it once, just be done with it. Boom. So, those are kind of some of the things that people try to calm down with OData. And it's like, okay, well, let's just calm down the querying, fix the indexes, and return to straight endpoints. Now, GraphQL is a bit different.
Yeah.
It allows you to really control that stuff, but it's pretty hard to understand how all the join points, like it's a pretty rich specification. And I've heard a lot of people have success with it, and I've heard a lot of people have not so much success with it.
Well, and I think when you're doing, like, if you're a massive, set of data, like it, if you're GitHub, like, GraphQL makes sense to invest in and implement, but because there's so much data, and it's an okay way to consume it for a lot of consumers. But like, if you're just doing it, I mean, if you're just doing it for your own app, like, why? If you're doing it for a customer facing thing, like, maybe.
They do things a bit differently, though. They're really good about throttling you. So you can make the big call, but they can be like, no, you don't. So they've got some really good throttling mechanisms, but that can suck too, right? Because it depends on how you throttle. Now, usually with the GitHub client or that GraphQL, you're hitting it from like a server, or like, you're not really doing it from a back end. You're probably doing it from like a client facing app, and you've integrated somehow because it needs like a GitHub token and all that stuff, right? So, but they're able to throttle at that level, right? On the server, if you're doing it for a whole bunch of people, well, it'll slow you down from pulling too much.
Yeah. No, I'm a pretty big fan of more purpose built stuff, unless there's like, it's kind of to me, it's like one of those, premature optimizations, right? It's like, don't do this until you know that you actually need to do it.
Yep. And that kind of brings us to our good point. So I tend to build, I've been big on this vertical slice thing. Mm-hmm. I've been big on it for a while, but I've kind of come back to it. For the server for several years, one of kind of the big .NET community guys on the server. He's been an end service bus advocate for light years. He wrote AutoMapper, and he's written a thing called Mediator. His name's Jimmy Bogard, and I've been using Mediator for quite some time. It's really good at kind of...
You know how it's dated by the naming convention, right? When everything was like, let's drop the vowel between. Yeah, exactly.
But it's fantastic. It's a small little thing, just like AutoMapper was. But then people found ways to use AutoMapper, and now it's like the devil. I'm pretty sure the original intent was to take a DTO or data transit object from your API and map it through to a service bus call, right? Because there'd obviously be differences between the two. There's usually more data you feed to it, like the user ID, which shouldn't be coming from your DTO. And so you bolt that on to your object before you'd send it to the service bus for processing. So that I'm pretty sure was the original intent. And people are like, hey, we can use this for entity framework and, solve world peace with AutoMapper.
That's
and
right.
now it's like the devil. And people are like, I hate this thing. It sucks. What were you thinking? And it's like, well, the original intent was fine. You abused it. So Mediator is kind of the same thing. People are like, what's the point? The point to it is, for me, is that it's very easy to pull it apart later when you get it. Everybody wants to write microservices right away. And because it's the cool thing to do. And it's like, okay, you've made a mess of something that gets like 5 users.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And Mediator's not hard to get. Like, it's not an over-engineered problem. You can make it that way, but you can start small and expand it out really quickly, like super quick. And so you can get to a microservice point. So if you've got one set of endpoints where you're like, oh my God, it's like 99% of our traffic, you can unbolt it, put it in a separate service and scale it that way.
So does it help you like how, what's the mechanism at that point that you're kind of routing things, I guess?
Well, you still end up using, like, you still come in with the standard controller or minimal API. But what it does is, instead of calling a method directly, you're passing an object, like a request object, and you're saying, I don't care who handles this.
Right.
Somebody handle it. If you don't, I'll throw an error. Right. So it's just like it's not, I don't want to say pub sub.
Right.
But it kind of is in that way. Like you pump a message out and hope that somebody's going to handle it. There should only be one handler, and you hand it off and get a result, right? You can use some cool generics to control that flow. Maybe it's a one-way command, etc. And it just does that. The other thing that a mediation type pattern does is it allows for events. So you can keep it all tightly bound, but kind of request response and eventing is the whole purpose of a service bus. So if you do it locally, again, very easy to break out. And an event might be something like, hey, I just created an order. Maybe I've got one that's listening for email, to send email. So, hey, order created, an email. Another event is like, hey, send an SMS to tell the guy we're shipping it, etc. So it does all those cool things, right? And it allows for a very broken up kind of approach that you can truly break up into microservices later. So I love to tell people, start small, start with a modular monolith. That's the popular term these days. And use this because it's not over engineering. It's very easy to use. It really focuses on the problem, right?
Yeah,
so
there's not a handler. A lot to it. Yeah, it's kind of really simple, simple like categories of things, right? It's right. I like it.
So controller, you might have like an order controller, and it has a create, it has a get, it has, I don't know, what other things does an order have? It's several mechanisms, maybe a ship.
Yeah.
Right. So when we talk about Mediator, it's like I give it a order created or order create request, and it's going to do the thing, and it might return an order result to say, here's your order number, blah, 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 blah. And then it might publish an event in the back end that we're not waiting for.
Right.
But your order created handler is only to handle orders, order creation. So you can really focus on what needs to be dependency injected, right? What things need to happen from there, like events. So you don't need to inject your SMS or your email. That can happen from an event. So it really focuses you on the ability to create the order. Whatever you have to do to create the order, do it here.
Now, do you find that, like, to me, this seems like it would also still, I mean, not that there's necessarily a wrong answer, but it would be easy to, kind of not architect things in a way that is kind of the best way to use this. Is that a concern at all?
Yeah, people have trouble with separating like your domain,
Like,
right?
well, yeah,
So
because like you said, like, okay, I've created an order now. i- uh, Just the example you gave of like sending an email or some kind of an SMS, like you have to think about doing that, in an event versus doing that still in the, order. What do we call the thing? The order create handler, I guess, right?
yep.
Um,
I think what happens there, the events aren't too hard to figure out because people just start spawning events everywhere. And then if
mhm.
nobody's listening to that event, who cares? What really becomes the issue is that people don't know. So when I talk about vertical slicing, you have like orders and you might have like customers, right? And they'll tend to bleed those over into one another. And then you're like, it's kind of order customers. It's not customers and orders. And that's where things start to get a bit milky. You really have to kind of stay in your lane. But you have to do that anyways. If you go to a microservice approach and you start bleeding those services across, it gets really mucky real fast.
Yeah,
So you have to plan for it. But Mediator and Service Bus, they're not going to solve that for you. They're just going to make the mechanism really easy to pull it apart.
right.
If you've made the waters muddy to begin with, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, so it gives you a nice pattern to start with, like you're saying, and as a monolith, and then be able to move it apart. Now, when you go to move it apart, does Mediator itself help facilitate, like, scaling to different, instances or something like that? But I'm assuming somebody's probably built something on top of it to
No,
to do some of that.
because you can just change the URL up. You can treat it like a front door. So
Okay.
like a proxy, you can call over to the other API.
Okay, so
You can
a request handler would be associated with like an endpoint generally. Is that
could be, yep.
okay?
And that's you can move that endpoint out. You
Hmm.
can actually move it to a full other API or endpoint like URL.
Okay.
You could even move your events. So something like email, I might move that off to an email event handling service because there might be many events that I want to listen to that send email.
Yeah.
I don't need to bog down the server. And I don't want to pay Azure charges on. I could even bring it in house. I don't
Right.
care how
Right.
long
Yeah.
it takes to process the email.
Yeah.
Just listen for the events and send email.
Yeah. Running
And
your
if
own
I need
email
to take
server.
it down, right? The thing about Service Bus is if I send a message to it and as an event, I don't care how long it takes to run.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I do, but you know what I mean? Is I can send it there. If I've taken the service offline to do an update or whatever, I bring it back online. It just continues processing, like taking mail out of a mailbox.
Yeah.
So you can start to break those things out. And it's super easy because you can take your event handlers, basically copy the code into this new project
Mm-hmm.
and tell it, okay, listen to the service bus now for your calls and do the thing. Right. And I can turn an event handler in the mediation pattern to say, yeah, we see you got this event. Just send it to the service bus now. So you can keep the pattern the same in your API and just kind of explicitly grow or implicitly grow without having to do a lot of work.
Yeah. Not optimize, before you need to.
So I'm big on Mediator. It's a godsend if you do it right.
Yeah. These kinds of things. I don't build enough different things. So like, it's kind of the same thing when we've talked about your mediator type pattern for, mobile space.
Yep.
It's like if I was doing a new app today, this all sounds amazing and I would do it. Um, getting it stuffed into something that exists is obviously possible. It's just, the
Is it
having the
worth it?
motivation to do it kind of thing. But
Yeah.
like, it almost makes me want to, because it's like, yeah, this is really cool. If I was gonna do it from the start, how would I architect things and do it in such a way that it's conducive to use this? I like
You'd be
it.
surprised how easy that is to build into existing apps for the most part.
Yeah, I mean, you can start small, right? You don't have to do the whole thing at once. You can pick
Mhm.
a part of it and do it from there.
We'll have to talk about that in a future episode,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. So what about, so I kind of jumped ahead to Service Bus and the modular monolith and
Yeah.
stuff. What do you do? Do you do real-time stuff at all, like SignalR?
No, I mean, like the whole Chat GPT thing that I was looking at is as close as I maybe get to that. I don't do anything. Once upon a time when I tried using Realm, originally that was a little bit more like that because it was kind of handling things. But I haven't had a lot of need to do any of that. How about you?
I've done some SignalR, but I found as time's gone on, especially with the disconnected realm, because obviously I'm writing more mobile apps than web these days.
Mm-hmm.
There isn't really the need because keeping a mobile app connected to SignalR is next to impossible. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. Because once
second
that backgrounds, it's like you're done, right?
Right. So there's still a few points where I still use it for small things,
Mm-hmm.
like a chat app. It makes sense. But even in that case, you can do polling and the whole 9 yards.
Well, even like the JSON streaming, the thing that I'm talking about too, right? Like that
Yep.
that could be a way to do it. I mean, it might not be the best way, but
well, and it SignalR kind of works like that anyways under the hood, right? It's just a pump. So
right.
you could have a stream open and just keep pumping the data as it comes in. So I might do that for like a GPS app where I'm like, where's my fleet? Right.
Yeah.
So I might have SignalR pumping those events as it's reading them. But even that can get dangerous versus like it just every 3 seconds call the server and get a blast of data. So you really have to pick your poison. But I'm finding it less and less important to the mobile side these days.
Yeah, no, I would agree. And maybe partly because the mobile side doesn't really, like you said, it doesn't really let you use that to begin with.
Right. And again, because I'm hitting the database for most things, again, not for fleet GPS, like real-time stuff like that. But
yeah,
I still might do HTTP and just work with it because otherwise you keep connecting to this thing and then you have to wait and then you have to wait for messages. And it's like, you know what? I'll just pull.
Yeah, well, and that's it, right? And maybe because things have gotten cheap enough to do that. Like I find it hard to think of use cases that really I'm like, oh no, this would be great with real time. Like it just doesn't happen as much anymore.
Now you could argue, okay, if you did it through SignalR and you stayed connected, it's probably faster because you don't have to hop through all the layers, right? You don't have to make the connection in HTTP client, do the DNS resolve. Then the server doesn't have to go through the authentication portion and all that crap. Like there's a lot of hoops to jump through in an HTTP request that people don't realize.
Yeah.
So arguably it could be faster, but in practice it's not because you still end up doing that with SignalR if they're going to the background or they're swapping between apps anyways.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I personally haven't found a need for it much these days, but I'd be curious to see what other people think about it now. Like, are people using SignalR still?
Yeah.
I was using it for sync for a while. And the thought is that if I had a lot of data, right, I could be like, here's a record. Did it sync? Okay, remove it from my list. Here's a record. And it was slow that way, but it was guaranteed order.
Yeah.
Right. So like a transaction log for a database is guaranteed. And I could just stream as much as I could before the connection lost. But it slowed everything down.
Yeah.
Because
and
then I had to do make database connection, start transaction,
right,
ship data, commit transaction, return.
Yeah. And then you compare that against like, kind of batching those up into like individual calls or something instead. And it's like, okay, so if you batch them into like a set of 100 or whatever, right? Or whatever's left in the queue.
Well, and that's what I did. I started batching it. I put a unique identifier on it. So I would update my database locally and I'd say, these ones are going in this batch. And if I happen to send them again, so let's say I didn't get the kickback from the server because the server was taking forever.
Yeah.
The server will go, no, we already received that batch. Get out of here.
Right.
Or it just wouldn't even error. Just be like, okay, great.
Yeah. Be like,
we saw this already.
Give us the next
lost.
one. Yeah.
So exactly. That ended up being a safer method anyways, and it was a lot faster. So what about when you deploy these things? I know you're Azure heavy. I know a lot of the companies I work for are Azure heavy. But for development, obviously, you're using Docker. I know you're using Docker.
I mean, I used it for some stuff here and there. The thing that I'm finding is like I don't have a lot of infrastructure that has a bunch of different pieces to compose. Like I'm not doing microservices. I'm not, my web app is a monolith. It's one thing. It's one project that I deploy through GitHub Actions when I want to Azure, and that's it.
You don't have like a timed service or like a workflow service that runs like periodic.
No,
subscription, like time out a subscription, for example.
Right? No. So what I mean, that's all like date based, right? So I kind of know when the transaction happens, okay, you're good till this point, and then the client checks every once in a while. And I'm just kind of lazy about like, if you get away with messing with the system a bit. Like, good for you.
There you go. Everybody go download Pool Math and find Jon's holes.
And there's some like ways that I know already that exist to do that, right? So like because I want it to be cross-platform and subscribe from anywhere and know that everywhere, you could subscribe like on, you could actually subscribe somewhere, log into an account, log out of your Pool Math account, subscribe, or log into another different Pool Math account and restore your subscription, right? And then it's going to apply that date to both accounts. And it's like, okay, go start selling, cheaper, one-off accounts that you built that you're maintaining a subscription for. Like, I don't know. It's fine. I don't care.
There you go. There's how you get free Pool Math for your family.
There's a business idea. You can it's like Pool Math arbitrage.
Pool Math.
Yeah,
there we go. So I do use Docker because I'm always going to have some services like a workflow that runs, a time service that wakes up. Generally, if I'm in a big boy service, like stuff that's getting a lot of heat, there's already a microservice. So I'm big on being able to deploy that locally.
Yeah.
I don't like that. There's a client I have that they are so Azure heavy. They're using Cosmos DB and SQL Server and stuff. Now SQL, I can put that in a Docker container, restore the database, all that cool stuff. Cosmos DB, I know there's an emulator out there.
Yeah.
I think there's a Docker thing out there. I want to hear it. It's if I can't do a Docker compose file and go Docker up and give it an environment file and it's just up and spinning in a few minutes, I don't want it.
Yeah.
Leave me alone.
They might have more of that now, but I think, admittedly, it probably doesn't work everywhere yet. That kind of thing. So it's probably not ideal.
And that's fair. I mean, I use it for my stuff because I can spin up an environment, test it locally, see the traffic moving. There's a lot of cool stuff out there. Aspire is supposed to help with that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not completely sold on that. I know Microsoft is pushing it hard. They've got that OTel/telemetry thing. What is it called? Aspire.
I mean, it's open telemetry stuff, but
yeah, it's pretty cool. It doesn't store it, so there's no historical value in it, but it's pretty darn cool. It's easy to spin in my containers. So lots of cool stuff there. But I'm big on Docker for all of that stuff. And then it makes it super easy to deploy dev environments. In production, well, you can CI/CD your way to cloud native. Is that the cool term we use now?
Something like that. Yeah, I think so.
I don't even know what that means anymore. I'm like, dude, if you're hosting on a Windows, it's still IIS, I'm pretty sure. Maybe some Kestrel now. But like, this is just a web server. We can call it whatever you want. Whatever the market is. See, they're better at marketing.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I should have called this, what would have been a cool name for this now? I don't know. The native backend. The cloud native backend. But it's not cloud native if it's Docker, is it? Anymore? I don't even know. I don't care.
Yeah, naming is hard. But yeah, I mean, Docker makes, I think, a lot of sense for a lot of developers and workflows and stuff. But then the Aspire thing, I don't think it's necessarily competing with that so much, right? Like maybe it is to an extent it's helping that. That is one thing that I am looking at trying to switch my stuff to use, because like I said, I don't have that many pieces, but the pieces I have, it'd be nice to just have like, okay, Cosmos, it knows, to either try and hopefully use a emulator if that's kind of built into that at this point. I don't know. But then it knows how to like inject, the right connection string to the web API and set that all up and order it properly. So it's interesting, I think.
It's something that I've been looking at. I'm not completely sold on it yet. Because it's the cool new thing. Everybody's jumping on board.
Yeah.
And I guess I'm getting a bit more, becoming a bit more of a pragmatist over the years. I don't know. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, let everyone work out the initial bugs and stuff, right? Figure it out and then get to it after it's all nice and works well and is still around.
Well, and the thing is that once it's there, does it help with the scaling? I mean, it can talk to Kubernetes.
I don't know if it's supposed to help with the scaling. And I could be wrong. This is just my own take. I think it's mostly about like, oh, how do I like compose all these pieces and have the config all set up together and not have to write a Docker compose file. Like it will help figure out, okay, I have my web API project. It references these things, which reference that thing, and they all I need Redis, I need Cosmos, I need whatever. And instead of me having to go like set up all the different configuration and endpoints and stuff, especially if you're flipping between running locally and running in your deployment, it's the same code that orchestrates that for you, right? So that everything knows how to talk to each other no matter where you're running it is I think one of the big parts of it.
All right.
So I think that alone is worth using it. Whether or not it helps with actually scaling stuff up and stuff, that's kind of beyond my understanding.
Well, that's fair. I mean, to me, it hasn't been hard to spin it in a Docker Compose for what things I've been doing. And the good thing about having it in the Docker containers is that, like, if an infrastructure specialist, now I don't really do Kubernetes. I can do the absolute basics. I don't like it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not my field anyways. But there's infrastructure engineers that can go in and set up all the nodes, set up all the elastic scaling, and they're happy because it's a container. They can, we'll take it. I don't know if they adjust what they do to adjust, but it just works.
Yeah.
And so that's always been a thing, is that I can test my container locally. I can test all of the stuff together locally, throw it over the fence, and then the Kubernetes guys are fine with whatever they get and fixing it up. And sometimes they'll give some Kubernetes stuff back, and then you just switch up your CLI and it's great. It still runs locally. It takes a lot more runtime.
Yeah.
But it works.
Yeah. And I think like, again, this is kind of trying to help build with that in mind, right? So like it's still like I know your app still can be or does or can be, launched in a Docker container, and it's still using that stuff behind the scenes. At the elevator pitch that I always kind of heard was like, why do I have to think about, I've already defined the relationships between these things within like my project references and my, how I'm like building my app builder and stuff, and like referencing Redis and referencing Cosmos and referencing all these things. Like, why do I have to then go set that up somewhere else a second time? Like, you should be able to infer from how I compose these things within my code how to do that for me. And I think that's the elevator pitch.
All right. Sounds like a big overcomplicated extension method.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of, that's kind of what it is. It's just like extension methods that are like injecting, the things from all the different places in the right spots, basically, I think. So it's,
you need tooling and libraries for that.
You do. I think it's pretty well done. I'm a fan. I haven't gotten there to using it myself fully yet. I've started down that path. One of the I have Cosmos, and this can lead us into our next thing.
Yes.
I have Cosmos, but I'm using like the 2.x API, and they've now imminently are deprecating that one, and it's like it'll work, but they're not going to update it, and so now you have to move to 3.x, and if you want to use Aspire, you need to already be on that one. And so I'm like, okay, first I have to get there, and then I can think about using Aspire for all the stuff.
And you just labeled one of the reasons I hate cloud native sometimes, right? You got to deal with all that stuff, and sometimes
yeah, like when's the last time the SQL Server client changed, right? Like,
yeah, it just keeps running. You only get new toys. You don't really. Yeah. I don't know that you've ever been. You want to upgrade because you want all the latest performance improvements. I mean, Azure doesn't matter, obviously, but you want to get all the performance improvements in the new toys. At least back in the day.
Yeah.
Right? They were constantly adding stuff to T-SQL, and you were like, I can use that. I can use that as well. But it never broke.
Yeah. No, and
I know that the SQL client nowadays, you're like, okay, why is it including all this Azure stuff? I know that some of the community members were just eating them alive.
Oh, yeah. Some of the basic packages do that now. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. The SQL client pulls in like all of Azure just to run a SQL connection now. It's kind of crazy.
Well, speaking of SQL and databases, you probably have used a few of them.
I have done a lot of SQL Server. I've done a lot of Oracle. I've done a lot of MySQL in the past, which is now MariaDB.
Yeah.
Still MySQL exists, but Oracle bought them. So does anybody really use it?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think so.
I did a lot of Oracle back in the day when I was doing Java.
Me too. Sad.
But is it back then? We loved it.
No, I hated it every minute of it. Because
Really?
I had done SQL Server already, and then, well, to be fair, I went into it when I was at being a DBA for Oracle running on OpenVMS.
Okay.
That was not fun. I mean, I'm familiar with Linux and stuff. I know command line stuff. I had never used VMS before that, but I mean, it wasn't just the command line part of it that was sucky. It was just, now I've got Oracle on top of that and I have to figure out how to manage things through that. I did not like that. It wasn't good.
Oracle is very complicated. It was still a pain to set, but that's why they had admins, right?
Well, and that was the problem, right? Like, I remember I kind of had to learn on the job a fair bit about it. And at one point I remember not understanding how some of the transaction log stuff worked in terms of like clearing it out. And so at one point, like, we ran into the case where one of the apps, like one of the databases, it stopped working because the transaction log filled up.
Really?
Yeah.
See, that doesn't, Oracle was like a SQL Server back in that time. Like, I'm talking SQL 7.
Yep.
So like that's before.
Well, I might have
1997.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, I think I've used SQL Server 7, but I only in like learning and local dev and stuff. I think SQL Server 2000 was the first one I used in production.
I am a pinch older, so I think I might have had that inexperience.
I mean, it was there. Experience. I just was stuck on Oracle before that.
But SQL Server was a lot easier to set up, but the thing tanked like nothing.
Yeah.
You looked at it the wrong way and it was like,
no, that's fair. That's fair. But like Oracle, it tanked in weird ways that you didn't necessarily know unless you knew how it was going to, like the whole transaction log crap that I ran into.
That thing was, back in that time, we could shoot it with anything. Sure, it would take some time, but it would figure itself out. It would not die.
Oh no.
I don't know if that's the case anymore.
Actually, no, the VMS one never died. I will give you that. It was when we moved to Oracle on Windows Server, that things just died every other second.
Yeah, well, Windows also, to be fair, Windows still isn't as stable as it should be.
Yeah.
But that kind of makes sense. But SQL Server has come a long flipping way. Like it's a tank now.
And
it's
it runs
easy
everywhere
to still
now.
Move around. It runs everywhere. People still say there's scaling issues with it. I'm still of the opinion, if you set your boundaries up right and you split that thing up where you need to and you do the right indexing, it'll run just fine. You use caching.
Yeah. Yeah, that's more of like an app architecture issue at that point than anything, right? Not a database issue.
Now, I have seen Cosmos where there's just so much data, just recently, and it's beginning to kind of buckle a little bit.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Is that like they're not doing the proper partitioning and stuff, or?
I'm not sure 100% yet, but the way that data has to be shared, they can't really partition it in certain ways, and it's a lot of data.
Yeah, I mean,
a lot of data.
At some point, you kind of have to code around that too, right? Like some apps, like luckily my app. Well, first of all, I jumped on Cosmos DB early days before when I made the database. They were like, you can do a partition key. You probably should, but you don't have to. It's fine. So my actually to this day, my database still doesn't have a partition key set.
Oh.
Which is interesting. I mean, but luckily this is something I have to do in this off season because, it's getting to the point where it's like, if I need to scale past, because you can only, there's a max amount of data per partition that they allow you. I think still it's gone up and up over the years, but like when it first started, there was the 1 year I'm like, oh, I'm gonna have to move to like use partitions because I'm gonna hit the data limit. And then they're like, we just tripled the data limit you can have per partition. I'm like, thank you. You bought me another few years of not having to think about it, but I'm getting there. So I'm going to have to do
split it by user.
Yeah, by user ID is for me. It's an easy natural choice because it's like everything you put in there has your user ID associated with it. The only kind of one tricky thing, which I think I'll get away with just enabling cross partition queries on this particular query, is when you log in and I have to like figure out what what user object is mapped to like your authentication provider identifier, right? Or I could, and this is where I was kind of getting at, is like I could do the whole thing where I'm, duplicating data, because that's not always a bad thing when you're talking about NoSQL, right? I could create records that are using the partition key of like the social user identifier, and then I could create a record that tells me, oh well, what's your actual user ID, right? And I could query it that way. That would be fine. It's more duplicating data, but that's kind of, at that point it's like, yeah, who cares when you're doing
those IDs, right? It's IDs and things you're in control of for the most part,
exactly,
that aren't going to change.
So I could totally do that. I'll probably just try and see how it works with just doing a cross partition query, which is more expensive, but it's like, it's a login. It's not, it's not the thing you're doing all the time. So
Cosmos is working for you.
It's working. Yeah. Honestly, it's been great. There were some weird things to figure out coming from a SQL Server world. So like one of the things that I think now I could just kind of step back from, but when I originally did it, when you add logs and stuff to your pool, I want to keep associated with your pool what the kind of current snapshot is of it. So like, what was the last test log for all the different types of logs you might have, so that I can show on like the main page, like, oh, your last, chlorine level is this, your last, the last time you logged, doing this maintenance was then, et cetera, et cetera. And so I chose to kind of do the duplicate data route and update the pool's record. So whenever you add a test log or change a log on the server, I go query like, well, what's the most recent log of that type for your pool? And then I update the pool object. And I do that in Cosmos with like I forget what, I think I run a stored procedure. So they have that concept too. And I do this weird thing, and the code, like I'm scared to ever touch it, because it was kind of hard to write, and it's a little bit like of a recursive function call on it, but it performs super well. But that's how I've chose originally to do that before I started like caching everything in a local database anyway. So now what I could really do is say like, I don't need that stored on the pool. I can go just query the local database for those different logs and get that information, right? But it's, so it worked surprisingly well for that. I have, I like being able to store objects, because I'll do things like nest, what's the current weather conditions for that were logged at the same time that you did a test log.
More metadata without having to worry about missing metadata, right? You just check it. Is there metadata on this that matters? Right. No. Okay. Who cares?
So it's been really easy. I have a few optimizations that I need to do as well, in terms of like, they're starting to roll out some better advisors that'll say like, hey, you could really use these indexes, or like some composite index that we see costing you a lot, and try and get your costs down that way. But honestly, like the thing costs like $40 a month to run still. So like I have it set to like the elastic scale, right, or whatever. And it's just like, for the amount of revenue the app is generating, it's like, is it even worth the effort?
And that's the one thing. Like I've never been able to see where Cosmos can save money. But honestly, when we talk about running, if I run SQL hot, like a full charge SQL server on Azure, that with almost no traffic, like just it can chew, just sitting hot, it can chew up $200, no problem.
Oh yeah.
Just sitting there. It's not doing anything. Now it's hot, so if I hit it, it's instantaneous. And that's obviously not an elastic scale, but you're not waiting, right? It's just, boop,
it's there. It's ready to go.
So, but it costs, and it's not $40 a month. So
no, it's not that cheap. Yeah.
But one I have been doing, and this is, I'll be quick about this one because this one's small, but I've been trying to get Postgres SQL, a real big attempt. So I'm using it for my own apps now, for 2 that I'm writing, and I love it. The driver support in .NET for Postgres is amazing.
Oh, that's, I feel like it wasn't, many years ago, it was not that at all.
I'm not sure when it changed, but whatever whatever is there now is marvelous. Like the GPS or the geography stuff is amazing. They've got some proper time zoning stuff, which SQL Server is still kind of funky about, and it's there, and it works awesome. And the thing is a tank. Like, it's really fast. There's people using it as a queuing mechanism. So if you don't like RabbitMQ, you can set up a special table. They've got like this new table mechanism that's like ultra fast. Now it's
cool.
meant for queuing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's awesome. This thing is like, I don't know. I'm planning to use it, and it's a cost savings thing, right? Because I don't have to pay to use it, really. I have to pay to use it in production, really. I mean, at some point, there's always a kickback. There's always a cost somewhere.
Yeah.
But right now, I'm seeing some real good benefits on it. So if you're looking for another thing, I know MariaDB's out there, the MySQL MariaDB stuff.
Yeah.
But Postgres has been around so long, and it's just people that have used it in production swear by it. So that's also worth checking out.
Yeah, it's been forever since I used it. I mean, I remember back in the day wanting, I think it was just the novelty of like, ooh, what's this other one that I could use? But I didn't really ever do anything serious with it.
So I'm doing some pretty cool stuff with it, and I'm hammering it to test it out. It's working. I think it's going to be a real good thing for what I'm doing. So it's worth checking out.
Yeah,
but
that's good to know.
That leads us to two other things. Have you ever done a backend as a service? Have you ever rolled like Firebase has like everything now, right? It has auth.
Mm-hmm.
It has the database, which has syncing.
So like, have I like used any of those, you mean?
Used them or thought about using them, right?
Yeah. I did think about using Firebase. Actually, there's been a couple. There was one that did it get bought and then they kind of just shut it down? Oh, what was it called? It's open source. Like, I think some people still kind of maintain it.
Okay.
Shoot,
I'd be
I have to
interested
think
in
of the
what that
name.
is.
Yeah, it's from forever ago. Like, it was Xamarin Days. I looked at that one very closely and decided that it wasn't quite what I wanted. I looked at Firebase and I kind of almost tried that one too, but I was always a little shy of having to use like I don't the bindings, around it for like Xamarin stuff. Like they're kind of maintained, but I don't know. It felt like it's one of those pieces that if that's the thing that's foundational to my app, I didn't have the most confidence that, we'd always be like current on them and that there wouldn't be some weirdness. And then it's not the same like across platforms, especially at the time when I was looking at it. Oh, there's no abstraction. So it's like, well, then I got to do that. And I think the other thing, and this will be your favorite, is that there was no like Windows support for .NET for using it either. I had a Windows app in the store for the app, the Pool Math app. So
really? Oh, wow.
So that was kind of like it was an uphill battle to get there. So I was just like, nah, I'm just not going to use them.
So I've been looking at two, and I've tried to find uses for them in production with several customers.
Mm-hmm.
I can't quite get there because they come with a cost, right?
Oh yeah.
And I get it. And the other problem is that sometimes like these things do everything. Like they're user auth, right? So it's your user store. It's a database with sync. It's a push notification. It's an SMS provider. It's a real-time provider. It basically does all your infrastructure needs, just like Azure, but you can take it and run it locally, right? And then it does all the things.
You could stand it up on your server. Like, do they offer a hosted version of it?
Yeah. Well, no, these are meant, they do have hosted versions, but you can also stand it up in Docker Compose, whatever, spin it up as part of your infrastructure, and you have all of those things out of the box. So the two I've been looking at for years are, well, at least the last couple of years, is Apprite. So not RIGHT, right as in WRITE, and Supabase. That's not a Canadian slang. That is cool guy slang. SUPA base. And both of them seem to have their pluses and minuses. So Supabase uses Postgres, so I'm instantly more drawn to that. But Apprite seems to have an easier API surface to work with. I don't know that to be true, so nobody hate on me. It's just my general observations because I'm still wanting to use them. And Apprite uses MariaDB again. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean it's the standard in like open source community stuff. But yeah, when it comes to like scaling it up enough, is that really what you want to do?
And you pick your poison. But these are designed to scale. They're your infrastructure locally. They also, the other thing is they have blob storage, right? So if you're doing like Azure Blob Storage or any of that stuff, it's here as well. So these guys are like all the infrastructure you need locally, or you can deploy to the cloud, or they have a hosted version which you can use. So it seems pretty cool. I'm trying it. I want to use it because the time savings of all of that is fantastic. But the reason they don't end up working for clients is because clients usually have a database already. You're not going to port it.
Yeah.
They usually have a user base or some sort of user auth already. Push notification, I don't know. That one's not a big deal. They'll have some sort of email mechanism already. Good, bad, ugly, doesn't matter. They'll have it, right?
Yeah,
so it's really hard to... These are more... And again, nobody hate. This is just my opinion on it. They're more of a, you're starting a new app. You don't want to spin all this stuff up. You don't want to bring in all these pieces on your own and assemble the Lego. These give you the most things that you will need so you can focus on the business.
Right. Yeah.
Writing.
You're not trying to figure out all these pieces. I mean, that's the dream. And I think that's what part of why I didn't go any of those routes is because of the time I had with Realm. That made me very shy of like going into some other thing that it was kind of like a, magic black box that solved everything.
Well, and I'm not saying that these things will solve it, but people seem to swear by them. Like they love them.
I totally get it. I think if I was starting again now, I mean, there's more options than when I was trying to look. And I found the one that I was thinking of, by the way. It was called Parse.
Oh, yes, that's the one. I do remember that.
It looks like it still had some kind of resurgence as an open source thing. But, I don't know how it compares offhand to the other ones you mentioned. But just the fact that there are these other ones that aren't like, Firebase, that maybe are things you can host yourself too, like that would have been a lot more compelling than, maybe trying to do it myself again, if I had that confidence.
And who knows, right? Like, some of the things, like if you think when I go into Azure, sure, I can spin up an app service, but then I have to know the plans. And if you set your plans up wrong and that grows, you really got to, it takes experience to really set Azure up properly.
Yeah.
With a host like this, I mean, I don't have to worry about the billing stuff, right? It's just, it kind of works.
Yeah. And
I don't have to worry about Azure notification hubs, which is, I guess that's not hard to set up. It's a layer on top of Firebase, which is a layer on top of...
Well, but like you're kind of saying too, right? Like that's just more stuff to do if you're just trying to like write the thing. Like if I want to build the app, I don't want to have to think about a lot of those things.
Right. And you still have to set up like Firebase and APNS with this. If you're using them, you still have to point it towards an email service like SendGrid, or there's a couple others. I forget what they are. But
that's not any different than rolling your own anyway. Like I still have to set my stuff up to send emails with Azure email or whatever. And
And the other thing is too, is that user authentication. I'm sorry. Everybody uses MCell. I hate MCell.
Oh,
I get it, but I hate it. I hate it so much.
Putting my personal hat, not Microsoft affiliated, on because I want to be extra clear that this is my opinion of it, right? Is that it is very complex. And I think there's parts that are necessarily complex depending on how your integrations work, business to business, whatever.
Yeah.
But if you're building an app that's like not this big enterprise thing like that, like, it's not easy to set up. Like it's hard. And so, yes, you want authentication to be simple, and like Firebase authentication is pretty compelling in its simplicity. Now, there's parts of it that was another thing that I was like, I don't know how I'm going to do this exactly, because the way that they handle, like, you just have an account and then it's like this random, account ID, and how do you associate that back with the thing that there were, I don't remember exactly. There was weirdness to it though.
But people are using it. We just did we do slim bindings?
Yeah.
For auth?
Yep.
One of us did it.
I think it's there. I mean,
I don't remember.
Yeah.
Anyhow. So that's kind of all the infrastructure stuff I could think about, all the back end stuff. So databases.
Do any of those ones like try to do the offline sync thing, or have they learned and not really gone there?
I think so. It's optional. But obviously you still need a database to feed your push notifications. You still need a database to feed your user stuff, right? So it's there. I don't think you have to use it. I think you can still just build an API around it and still build an API around pretty much all of it if you want. It just, whatever you want to open up, you can. So I'm determined to try. I think
that's something else that Firebase, claims to try and do. I don't know how well it works in practice, but it's like your database is just there and it just works and like, okay.
See, the pessimist in me says, if I host it with Firebase, I can't test it locally without paying.
Yeah.
I don't know. Am I out of touch or something, John? Well, I like to know.
There's a free tier, right? So like in theory, you can test it a bunch and you're not going to pay anyway.
But if they choose to up the price,
you're beholden to them, like for sure. Yeah, absolutely. And this is why like Cosmos, I think you can argue the same thing, but at the end of the day, if I really want to move that, it's not totally. It's gonna be hard, but I can move it to Mongo. I can, there's a bunch of stuff I can do that's relatively similar.
You don't have a bajillion records in it because once you're there, you're not moving it.
That's part of it why I wouldn't at this point, because I have enough data in there that I'm not moving it anywhere.
But if you had to, you'd be. But they had a bajillion records.
They've done a good job though. Like I don't want to move it anywhere.
Yeah, no, and that's fair. And like I said, Apprite and Supabase, they could raise the prices on you as well, like licensing wise. But it's not like, hey, you're paying by compute. Right?
Yeah.
They're not going to raise it there. They can't really. I guess they could, but it's your compute. So wherever you're using the compute, you're paying for it somewhere. You can always move it to a cheaper place and it's portable. So I think that's the big thing. I just, because of Azure and AWS, the way they're moving costs these days and the way they're forcing you to update, I've become such a pessimist. That's how you know you're old. Like, I don't want to change. Yeah. Get off my lawn. Just leave my stuff. You don't tell me how to do it. I'll tell you.
Yeah. So I'm at, if account indexes too, which I need to bulk up on apparently if I want to save some read units, which is the thing that you pay for in Cosmos, this is another part of, and Cosmos is kind of the same thing and as Firebase here. It's hard to know what your costs are going to be, right? Like how many read units am I going to need? I don't know. What the heck is a read unit? Like I get they've kind of tried to figure this out and it turns out it's not that bad, but at the same time, it's like, it's not.
They still have trouble figuring it out though. You can put that analysis tool on a SQL Server database and they're like, it should cost about this much. It didn't cost that much at all.
Yeah.
There's been cases where it's been a lot more or a lot less.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you're like, how do we get here? Exactly. And the salespeople tell you, just be on Cosmos because like Microsoft sales, you're on Cosmos, you're pretty sticky. Right?
Yeah.
And they're like, it'll be the same cost. And usually what they do is they end up making a deal to get you on it.
Right.
And then once you're on it and that deal's now enforced, you're stuck.
Yeah. What are you going to do? So, yeah. So I'm at like, I'm approaching 20 gigabytes of data. So I'm getting there. Right. But it's not, so much that I couldn't move it somewhere if I needed to.
So there you go. When you get to billions of records, and they start, well, I guess you've got the money at that point. It won't matter, right?
That's the idea, right?
Then you can think about how to, because that's what happens, right? A lot of my customers, they're like cloud. They hyperscale, they get all this stuff in there, and they're like, as their business begins to kind of flatten out in terms of money making, which does happen, it has to happen, right? Until you spin off more things. Then they're like, okay, well, now we need to optimize. Okay, we're costs, right? We're going back up. Our costs are coming down.
Yep.
And then they'll be like, okay, now we need to bring hybrid approach to get our costs back down more. And that. I guess that's just the nature of business.
That is, and that's kind of like, that's funny because that's kind of in a much smaller scale where I'm at with the app too, where it's like I hit a kind of a cliff of like the basic tier of stuff wasn't doing it anymore, right? So I had to like scale up my web server a bit because I've got enough traffic. So it's like, okay, now my stuff starts to cost more. Do I want to try and figure out how to reclaim some of that? I mean, the answer probably is short term no, because it's like, okay, you're running a business, like you got to pay something to make the money, right? And if your ratio is pretty good still, like, okay, another $50 a month compared to what's coming in, like, fine.
Yeah, you don't need to pass that off to the customers right away.
No,
Some companies
exactly.
do, and then they're like, "Hey, we've got no users," and now you're screwed. So you
right. Or pass it off, or do the work to bring it back down. Like, do I want to spend that much time to save $5 a month? No,
you can split it, but if it's $5 a month times X amount of users, right?
Oh, sure, that would be different. But good news, I just checked. So because I just said I'm almost at 20 gigs. I'm like, I think that's what the limit was per partition. So like, am I gonna hit this soon? Like this year yet? Am I gonna? But every time I get close, they keep raising it. It's now 50 gigs. So I got years left if I wanted to do this.
Well, hey, if you keep going up though, keep getting popular.
Well, stuff's going to get slowed down too, right? So it'll cost more because like you're querying through one partition, over more and more data. So even just splitting stuff out probably will bring my usage costs down.
You have to optimize now to save money long term.
Well,
or to keep running apparently if that happens.
Yeah, but we're good. We're good for now.
So, packages of the week. I figured we don't really need it, but I'm going to put out the 3. I'm going to put out Mediator.
Yeah.
And everybody that's writing ASP.NET, I think you really should use it. Really, truly. It's a great library. Use it right. It's great. Refitter. John's
I'm typing them in so we don't forget.
Yeah, he's like teleprompting me right now.
I'm not sure which one you're picking as the third, though.
I want to throw out Apprite and Supabase. I think there's a third one that's popular right now. They're more infrastructure or backend-as-a-service, but they're pretty nice.
Yeah, they look good. They look good.
So we'll include the links. They're pretty. Everybody check them out. They will be on our wherever we post these things.
Well, I mean, if it's on somebody remembers to, or if you do, yeah. I certainly never remember, so
I will post the links.
There we go.
As soon as Jon posts the episode.
Nice.
And it's not that Canada Day Jon did forget he didn't post the.
I forget.
He's got the media file. He's the studio man because I am stupid, and we continuously prove this with the audio processing. We keep fixing my mic. I don't know if I sound like I'm breathing into the mic this week. I don't know if I'm gonna fix that, but
I didn't tell you that the last episode that we recorded, I actually messed up my audio again. It was all clipping and stuff. But our wonderful audio engineer Jim has found a VST plugin that helps tweak some of the clipping stuff. So it actually that works super well. I have to pay for it, but I'm like, I'd rather pay for this plugin than re-record the episode or have it sound really bad. So it's gonna be okay as a result, or okay-ish. But yeah, no, I've done that a few times now where Windows messes with my volume and it just messes it all up.
So Jon is like the studio engineer, and I'm kind of the project manager that just has to keep whipping like, Jon, where's the audio?
Yeah.
Where's the links?
Yeah.
Right. AI is doing the rest of it, kind of feeds the episodes and all that.
I don't know why I haven't shared the folder with you. It's all on a OneDrive folder.
Oh, well, there you go. See? Studio manager. Anyhow, we will get an episode out. The Canada Day episode was missed.
I might put I recorded a video today that I might throw up as a bonus. What's the word for like a mini episode? It's like a 7-minute thing that it's not related to tech at all.
Oh, okay.
It's more of a coffee thing.
Oh.
Just for you maybe.
Oh, there we go. Jon's gonna share his.
So maybe I'll start doing some of those. Do like a little video here and there. Anyway.
Okay. Well, there you go.
We've really dragged this one out. It's been going, so we probably should end it. But I would say before we end it, make sure that you go. You've had plenty of time listening to this, so make sure you go leave the 5-star review on the things, and we get some feedback, listener comments and stuff, but we'd read out more and talk about more if you want to send something. So go to
which our studio engineer also doesn't share with the project manager often.
I shared the ones that we get. I think there's a few. There's been a few.
Okay.
All right. Well, I have to do better.
Yeah, there we go.
Story of my life. All right. So that'll do it. Thanks, everyone. See you next time. Hopefully, if we don't forget, on another Gone Mobile.